Tongwei community, it's Kyle Whiteley again, just getting around to making another video about kind of the vision for Wuji Quan Fa. All the stuff past, present, future for it. Just here at my computer, so I guess don't mind the background too bad. But what I thought I'd go into today, the last time we talked a lot about some of the struggles with finding a good name for the system, and where did it come from that way. I think chatted a bit about Tom's intent, and I'm sure I'll get into a lot of that. Please feel free to comment if like that can sometimes have a good follow-on discussion, or it maybe can help me to know what other things people want. I've had a lot of people reach out and say thanks for making the first video, so hope you enjoyed the second one as well. I was gonna go over, so a lot of people had read kind of Tom's, from the Tongwei Martial Arts Institute, for lack of a better term, the brochure for what Wuji Quan Fa is. And so I'm going to read that, and then we can kind of get into some of the other notes he gave me about that. So one of the things that I found was really cool later in training was when we went through all the superior styles that kind of had a bigger influence on Wuji Quan Fa and on the Ge family system. So like I was mentioning in the first video, there really isn't, we say Wuji Quan Fa, that's something that Tom made. Guy Lindsay helped him to, who was a Chinese missionary, helped him to know some more legitimate Chinese and to make a better impression of saying of the name, if that makes sense, that Doc ended up liking more. So that's where we landed on Wuji Quan Fa. Still is a struggle oftentimes to tell people you train Wuji Quan Fa as a name. They're like, well, Wuji what? But that's what it is. So sometimes, that's why I've named my business All Origin Training, after the simple English translation of All Origin Martial Method. I guess a couple more things about the name that evolved over time as Tom and I talked about bridging the system, and as I've thought about it, is, like if you take the characters, they literally, is like Wu is 5, the number 5. Ji is like Taiji, like Taiji Chuan. It's the same Ji, which means it doesn't really have a direct English equivalent, but you could call it, I think, at one point I used like extreme. It kind of means a pole, like, because the Taiji is the grand terminus. It has the two poles, yin and yang, but maybe a better, so that, there's direct translation from Chinese to English, which sometimes is a good idea, and then there's kind of the meaning translation from Chinese to English in application. And in this case, I found at the end what I've stayed at for years now and I don't feel any need to move, is foundation. So G probably is best to be understood as like foundations. And so Quan Fa. So Quan Fa, the characters for Quan Fa, paradoxically enough, are the same characters that if you, the words Kenpo in Japanese, if you look at the characters and you use the Chinese pronunciation, which is the same characters, something sometimes people don't know, and I certainly didn't know until the Army trained me to know lots about the Chinese language, and to kind of master that, it opened a lot of things. The characters in Chinese, many of those characters are a basis for the Japanese language, and then they added some sound syllables and sound symbols into there. They call kanji. But so Quan Fa, as we know it, the characters for that, which means fighting method or fist law, sometimes you could translate it as, because the Quan literally is fist, and then Fa is a law. So, but typically it means Quan Fa means like a fighting method. They use Quan, Wuji or Taiji Quan. They'll say that, and it's that same fist character. That's, generally means the symbol of fist means fighting warrior. And so that's more what Quan Fa means, is a fighting method. And so Kenpo was the Japanese writing, the Japanese pronunciation of those same characters, just meaning simply fighting method. I guess a side tangent in some of what Tom told me about Kenpo that he loved, why he went to study that. Tom was very much like the family, and a lot of martial artists are. They just want to develop the most complete fighting approach possible. He started at a young age and was trying to learn whatever he could get a hold of from whoever he could learn it from. He wasn't wealthy by any means. He was very poor, so a lot of times he would just have to find someone that was willing to teach him something in exchange for him getting beat up, and being an uki, so to speak, or the guy that's getting tossed around, and he would learn that way when he was really young. After his mission, he ran into Ed Parker and down in Pasadena, California, and there's kind of some story there of how I'll tell maybe in another one that how he hit it off, and found that Kempo had a lot of that and was seeking the same thing. Ed had learned from several teachers and had brought it together into trying to make a very scientific approach to street fighting, to brutal hand-to-hand combat. And from what Tom said, Ed was a very successful and formidable fighter, and like one of the best he'd ever seen. Obviously, a lot of people had that impression, and so most martial artists, Bruce Lee was seeking the same thing. He was a contemporary at the time. We all want to find the most complete method possible, and so Kenpo, and they use the term karate not because it did have some Japanese lineage, but at its base it was more of a kung fu or gong fu, if you want to pronounce it right, style, is what Tom had told me. But karate was kind of what everything was. If someone learned martial arts, they just always called it karate, no matter what style it was then. That's how the Westerners knew martial arts was just known as karate. As time has evolved, some of that's changed. But that was more marketing oriented, when a lot of the basis was Chinese martial arts. And so there was some of the sets that are classic. There are certain sets that are kind of classic in Chinese martial arts. They're taught slightly differently in many styles, but you see them over and over and over again, certain Shaolin forms. And so that was a base where he's learning that. I don't know, I'm already on a side tangent here. But the Quan Fa and Wuji Quan Fa is basically just simply means fighting method, as opposed to when they just use the term Quan, like Taiji Chuan, it makes it more of a style. Tom would talk about like the difference between Kenjutsu and Kendo, or Jujutsu and, I guess they say now Jujitsu, but in Japanese Jujutsu, which he had a chance to learn, Jutsu styles were usually, and my Japanese may be way off. I don't profess to know Japanese pronunciation. I can barely keep up with English and Chinese, but I'm doing my best there. So if I'm off, forgive me. But so the Jitsu styles or Jutsu styles basically were the combat styles of the samurai, and they would, for example, one example he'd bring up is they would always circle the head with a rooftop on a downward cut, is generally how it did. The Do styles originally, they would lift and almost be a meditative style as they practiced cutting. And so the styles were very different in the way they moved the weapon. And because they're essentially doing a moving meditation. We essentially, so when you do some sort of taiji, or more appropriately named like moving qigong set, any movement done with that mindful focus, done slow, can essentially be what they were doing in those Do styles in Japanese. So all of it kind of links together. And so Jutsu styles were more like Quan Fa styles in old Chinese martial arts versus Quan. Quan was more of like the way, I would say Quan Fa if it's going to be very focused on direct application of fighting. And that's at least what Doc had explained to Tom, and so the lineage that he got there. So I think there's so many stories by now that obviously if it's different than what you heard, I'm not meaning any offense by it. That's the way the story was passed on to me. So if I go into it, so Wuji Quan Fa was just a name, right? I use 5 foundation martial method, since we divide kind of the 5 big goals of the system into that. And that's why I like that term. 5 is also kind of a code term, like we talked about in the first video a little bit, but there's a thing called a Wu Jindian, which is like a 5 metal shop, which is like you can find anything you're looking for there, like it's a complete shop. And that's where like the all origin, or all origin martial method, meaning we're open to all origins, trying to integrate from all origins. Sometimes I think it gets misunderstood to mean like we have everything. So we're not trying to be Master Ken martial arts. If you see those on YouTube, they're hilarious. We Meradote, we take the best from everything, we leave the rest. It's just the concept of being on all origin system. Tom said the fundamental tradition that Doc passed on to him was we use the best methods we're aware of, and we are always looking. We're always hungry for it. And so, when something improves, you got to be ready to leave behind the thing you used to have and upgrade to the other thing. One of the challenges is, you need to be picky about making sure it's an actual improvement, not just that it's new. If you're constantly just switching to new things just to switch, that's not really a great recipe for improvement. But when there is something that is demonstrably better, then it's probably time to move on and use it. And that's a big tradition we have, this all origin concept being an all origin martial method, or a Quan Fa system. So you could still see, I mean, in some ways, Kenpo and the goal there that Ed Parker had, and the Quan Fa that the family was pursuing, it's the same goal, and many people, many styles have pursued the same goal. So it's not unique to us, I don't think. I guess what is unique is kind of the story that the family had a tradition of doing it for so long and refining it for so long. That's what Tom would often say, is that it was the small refinements that allowed things to move faster and to hit harder, and that changes the game. I mean, at the end of the day, power, if we go through 5 foundations, as I went through all the stuff I learned from Tom and tried to compile, like, what's the so what of everything? This page of notes, I got like 1,000 pages of notes. What did this page I wrote down contribute to? And it really comes down to 5 very simple but profoundly valuable things that you can learn in martial art. Number 1 foundation, power. Meaning power motion concepts, power output, how to create more raw power in your strikes, your kicks, your grappling. But also power application, how to use it well on another person, to have a powerful output that actually you can apply on a human target. Targeting, that means in a lot of ways. You go to mindset is next. So, what's your overall framework for what combat is? Bridging and pressing, I think of as a big piece of that. You need to have those ingrained and understand them deeply as a basis for your mindset. And performance psychology, how do I perform under pressure? Everything about that is super valuable into that foundation. And just generally, obviously, mindset itself for dealing with combat, how to bridge, how to press, like those things, kind of your general foundation for what combat is. Those things, just all the stuff that we went over and over again, actually oftentimes is kind of, everyone talks around it but doesn't get it quite as well as what Tom said, what I find the family system gives. We really are able to build that combat mindset to a strong degree. Really doesn't do you much good if you develop a lot of other things, but your mindset's lacking. You won't use it when it matters. Your 3rd foundation, start to get into the stuff most people think of. Strategy and tactics is the 4th foundation for fighting. Strategy is everything you do, once again, not necessarily throwing punches and kicks still, everything you do prior to be situationally aware, awareness drills, setting things up for your advantage and minimizing disadvantage. And then you get into tactics, which is what most people traditionally think of as martial arts. That's techniques, sets, basics, punches, kicks. What are you actually trying to do? That's the stuff you can see, in a fight. But the other 3 foundations are what feeds it and determines really how well it happens. A straight punch is a straight punch. Some people have their hand vertical. Some people turn it more. Ultimately, we turn it to fit to the target. Lots of people throw straight punches. The question is how hard to hit with them. The question is the mindset you have for using it right, the strategies you use to set it up for advantage. So, tactics kind of is the 4th foundation, and which comes down to training the core fighting tactics, which what are the core essential movements, how they come together, and then from that you get examples of sets and techniques, which are a lot like books. You learn grammar, so to speak, and then you experience them through seeing books and reading books and learning examples. We have 20 main primary template forms in tactics, and from those, then in 4th and 5th step, usually you would get cross maps of those primary templates. So like primary templates would be things like evasive body, evasive foot, hands out 1 through 5, kicks out 1 through 3 is what I have. And there's some of these, honestly, I didn't get from Tom that he had mentioned he had, and he just said I kind of forgot those. So it wasn't huge on like sets, obviously the ones that he knew. If you knew him, he performed them with extreme depth and proficiency. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he said sets and techniques are basically just there to make sure there's enough examples to launch you as a martial artist, and he tended to focus more on core fighting tactics and those things in seminars, the core principles of how to get advantage, how to hit with power. So there's kick set 4 I've heard of, I never learned. There was sword set 5, which I have a video of, and we talked a little bit about from like double sword fighting. It's double sword set. There's a staff set 4 and 5 I never got to see. So I only have the 20 that I have, and from that I have a bunch of cross maps that Tom showed me, like 10 different cross maps off of the double baton set. I've got like 7 cross maps off of 22-man sword set, which those were original family templates, he said. The sets and techniques, a little side tangent. Some of them, Doc was not one of the things, and if you've ever taught, one of the things I enjoy the least, and no offense to anybody, it's if you struggle to remember, I'm not meaning it in a bad way, because a lot of people struggle to memorize sets, I get it. It's just not fun to teach someone to memorize sets. It's a lot like sitting down and having someone memorize letters, and you can do that, and that's great. One of the beautiful things of the information age is I can make a video of that, and someone can go get the sequence of the set, and then I can do the fun stuff, which is show you how to use it and show you some of the subtle things in it, like how to create more power, speed, how to have more internal energy with it. That's the fun stuff. And so Doc didn't always want to get around to teaching giant forms. Some forms, for example, that we have, like our handset 3, is the salutation to a 1,000-man Hungar set, or 1,000-move Hungar set. And the salutation is where Doc liked it the most and said, like, all right, since we'll show you this only, and then I'll show you how to use that for power and speed and other things like that. So our sets are a little bit shorter than I'd say a lot of Kung Fu styles are, and like the handset 2, Tom was asking about like using less punching and more open hand strikes, and Doc asked him, well, do you know any sets that do that? And he remembered the finger set from Kempo, and not to be offensive or anything to any, like I'm not meaning this bad at anyone from Kempo, but Doc kind of had a low opinion of the way Tom performed it, where he's standing kind of still, and he's like, that looks like a poorly executed version of a Shaolin set we know as a Shaolin, open hand basic set, which emphasizes a lot more of your body maneuvers with turns, pivots, and center, turn, pivot, and center. So similar movements ultimately, but a lot more dynamic body maneuvers in it. So he used that as a template and said, well, I'll teach this to you. And Tom just numbered some of those sets later on for people as handset 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As far as like the official library, Tom didn't read or speak Chinese. So he got what Doc shared with him, and that's what he gets, and Doc told him by the end that he was at a 5th step level, and he went off of that material himself. That's the way he put it. And so, are there other sets out there? Potentially. He said there was, the staff set 5 was pretty cool with the flexible staff that would whip and several maneuvers that way. It was a longer staff. And, so he learned, he showed me a bunch of techniques, and we would go over a lot of things, but he couldn't remember that set. He was like, I'm looking for it in my notes. And so, from that cross map, we did a lot of cross mapping with the weapon that used a lot of those things, meaning like you take a weapon set and you say, how would I do it if I had a staff in my hand instead of 2 batons, or 22-man the same way. And that is kind of what he decided he wanted to land on, right? Because it's so time intensive and sometimes laborious for people to memorize sets. And sets are basically organized drills. And so the 20 that I have, he was pretty happy with and didn't feel like it needed to have any more. And so, for some people, it's going to have a lot of heartache that, hey, we don't know what those other things are missing, kind of like almost like, not to try to compare it to the Bible in importance, but like missing books from the Bible. But it doesn't change the books you do have, and you go off of those, and maybe we develop some new sets that fill in some gaps. Usually with the cross-mapping sets, though, we have all the weapons you need to learn how to use, and you're getting to learn maneuvers in all sorts of directions. And the whole point, remember, of a Quan Fa style is that we're going to give you a system, and from that you're able to create kind of your own effective style of martial arts, and then to dip back into that system over and over again over a lifetime to upgrade your own style. Because in the end, Tom was big on that too, is you're not going to use someone else's style when you fight. And you're not going to use someone else's style of staying healthy when you try to stay healthy and all the rest. And like, there's a system represents the neutral line of material that we can kind of all share as a community to have a common frame of reference. But then each master and each longtime practitioner is going to kind of do it a little bit different. And you just got to, like, he's like, it's an art, and we don't want robots that memorize things. We want living practitioners So there's always kind of a struggle on everyone remembering it a little bit different, and I do my best. I was definitely bad at that in the beginning. I was trying to do it all the way I wanted to do it, the way that's comfortable to me, and just be like, I remember maybe closing this out a little bit. I didn't even get around to the brochure. I'll make that in another video. But I remember Phantom sword set, and I didn't like the move where after you cut here, you cut down low at the leg and you spin around to stab. And I'm like, why aren't we spinning around? Number one, it's harder. It's body control. Let you scan. It's just the way the set is. And, so I just was going cut, turning in, and stabbing from there. And, so when I was making that change, Tom's like, why are you doing it that way? And I'm like, well, it's more bridged. And we had a long discussion. He said, yes, it's more bridged. In the sense of the way you're doing it, if that's the only opponent. I guess I have to do a different video where I can show the sword set on it, but he said a couple things. The way Doc put it, he said, we don't want to have as drill bases an argued thing of like, we're getting down to the most core bridge thing, and I definitely had that biased. I was like, I just want the thing that hits them once and drops them. I'm going to focus on that. And that's great when it's available. I wouldn't skip that, but when it's not available, you gotta have other options, and when there's other problems. Like, in that particular movement, we've ducked and we've cut someone down at the leg, and then yes, we could step in and stab right from there, but in this instance, there's other opponents we need to scan for. So as we cut back up across the arm, and then as we spin, it gives us the opportunity, if we're being attacked from the back, to cut another direction if we needed to. So